The Crusades were some of the most famous military endeavors in history, filled with courage, cunning, and chaos. They've captured the imagination of many history enthusiasts like myself, and while I am sure that many of you have heard of the First and Third Crusades, in total there were actually 9 major crusades. And in this video, we will explore each one and uncover the stories behind them. So let's dive in. First of all, it's important to understand what event sparked the start of the Crusades. For a large part of European history, the Byzantine Empire was the bulwark of Christianity against the Muslims, specifically the Arabs and the Turks. Between the 7th and 11th centuries, however, the Byzantine Empire had steadily lost territory, culminating at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, after which the Byzantines lost most of their territory in Anatolia. In 1081, Alexius Comnenus ascended to the Byzantine throne. Now, Alexius recognized that what remained of the Byzantine Empire did not have the strength to retake Anatolia. Instead, he sought support from the West, under the pretext of aiding fellow Christians against the invading Muslim horde. At this time, the Pope, Urban II, desperately needed some political stability, and uniting European nobles to fight the Muslims seemed like a good way to do so. To attract soldiers to the crusade, Urban basically proclaimed that all those who would crusade in the Holy Land would be absolved and forgiven of their sins. Side note, as a Christian myself, I can guarantee you that this is not how Christianity works. This offer was a bit too effective, as though it did attract many soldiers, it also attracted a lot of unskilled peasants. Stirred into a frenzy by hermits and preachers, 2 large groups of several thousand of these peasants actually launched their own crusade a few months before the actual crusade was scheduled to begin. Both of these expeditions were wrought with chaos, and upon arriving in Anatolia, were crushed by the Seljuk Turks. 7 European nobles took up Pope Urban's call to crusade: Bohemond of Taranto, Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond Count of Toulouse, Robert of Normandy, Robert Count of Flanders, Hugh Count of Vermandois, and Stephen Count of Blois. They all left from different areas of Europe and planned to meet up at Constantinople. Upon reaching Constantinople, they all swore an oath to Alexius Comnenus that they would return to him any former Byzantine land. This promise would not be kept, by the way. They crossed the Bosphorus in 1197 and began to besiege the strategically important city of Nicaea. After capturing the city, the Crusaders marched inland through central Anatolia. They were harassed by the Seljuks, coming close to being wiped out at the Battle of Dorylaeum, though Bohemond distinguished himself through his quick action and military genius. A few weeks afterwards, the Crusaders reached and besieged Antioch. The city's massive size proved challenging for the Crusaders, though Bohemond once again distinguished himself by bribing a guard who opened the gates to the Crusaders. After capturing the city, and then fending off a Turkish counterattack, the Crusaders finally marched toward Jerusalem in 1199. After a 2-month siege, the city fell to the Crusaders. The Crusaders left behind a Christian-controlled Levant, divided into 4 Crusader states: the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Despite being wrought with chaos early on, the First Crusade had actually accomplished its original goal of reclaiming the Holy Land for Christendom, something that very few future crusades would be able to do. And while it's more likely than not that Pope Urban had called for a crusade due to political reasons, the First Crusade sparked a religious fervor within Christendom to retake and to defend Jerusalem and the Holy Land. In 1144, the Seljuk Turks conquered the county of Edessa, one of the Crusader states. Fearing that the other states could fall like dominoes soon after, Pope Eugenius III issued a bull calling for another crusade. Taking up the cross were Conrad III, King of East Francia, and Louis VII, King of France. Conrad's German contingent departed in May 1147 and arrived at Constantinople in September, significantly earlier than Louis's French contingent. Conrad decided not to wait for Louis and advanced on Iconium, an important Turkish city in Anatolia, by himself. Conrad lacked the military genius that the leaders of the First Crusade had had, and his army was almost completely destroyed at the Second Battle of Dorylaeum. What remained of Conrad's army returned to Constantinople to await the arrival of Louis's contingent. Upon their arrival, Louis decided to march along the coast instead of journeying inland. Despite being harassed by the Seljuks, the Crusader army reached Antioch on the 19th of March, 1148. There, Louis left abruptly for Jerusalem, where he held a council with the other rulers of the Crusader states. Meanwhile, there had been a succession crisis within the Seljuk Empire. The ruler of the Seljuks, Zengi, had been stabbed to death by one of his slaves, and the empire became divided between his two sons, Nur ad-Din and Saif ad-Din Ghazi. The ensuing civil war left the strategically important city of Damascus in a vulnerable position. The Crusaders agreed to attack Damascus in June of 1148, hoping that Zengi's two sons would be too preoccupied with fighting each other to help Damascus. However, Nur and Saif signed a truce and came to Damascus' aid. Just 4 days after beginning the siege, the Crusaders were driven back. While some Crusaders wanted to continue fighting, this defeat at Damascus was effectively the end of the Second Crusade. In 1176, the Sultan of Egypt, Saladin, overthrew the ruling Zengid dynasty and established himself and the Ayyubid dynasty in its place as the premier power in the Middle East. The Ayyubids and the Crusader states engaged in several battles between 1183 and 1187, culminating with the capture of Jerusalem by the Ayyubids. In response, Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade. 3 European monarchs, Richard I of England, Philip II of France, and the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick Barbarossa, responded to the call. Barbarossa's German contingent left first in 1189. After a long march through Central Europe, the German army reached Anatolia, where they inflicted heavy losses on the Seljuk Turks. All was going well until June of 1190, when Barbarossa drowned in a river. Most of his army then dispersed back to the Holy Roman Empire, and so were of little help to Richard and Philip's crusade. Philip and Richard's army arrived in the Holy Land in 1189, and, within the span of about 2 years, besieged and captured the 2 important coastal cities of Acre and Jaffa. Despite these successes, Richard did not attempt to capture Jerusalem. He and Saladin agreed to a peace treaty that would cede most of the coastal territory of the Levant to the Christians, while Jerusalem would remain under Muslim control, though Christian pilgrims would be allowed to visit the city. Pope Innocent III called for a new crusade in 1198. Answering the call was a contingent of French and German soldiers united behind the leadership of Boniface, Duke of Montferrat. Boniface sent envoys to Venice to request the Venetians to build a fleet of ships to carry the estimated 30,000 crusading soldiers to the Holy Land. However, the Crusaders' lack of cohesion and unity hindered their efforts, as only 12,000 of the Crusaders showed up at Venice, with the others sailing from different ports. The Venetians practically froze their entire economy in order to build this fleet, and so the enormous amount of money that they demanded as payment was too large for this much smaller Crusader force. The Doge of Venice, Enrico Dandolo, suggested that in order to repay this debt, the Crusaders could attack Zara, a city on the Adriatic coast that the Venetians had long sought control over. This was controversial amongst the Crusaders, since Zara was a Christian city. Ultimately, though, the Crusaders needed to repay their debt to the Venetians, and they besieged and captured Zara in November of 1202. Upon hearing this, Pope Innocent III excommunicated all of the Crusaders, though he later rescinded this upon learning that the Crusaders were coerced by the Venetians. The Crusaders were still short on funds, however, and a succession crisis in Constantinople would force their hand. A Byzantine prince by the name of Alexios IV Angelos offered to provide weapons, money, and soldiers to the crusade if they would help him oust the Byzantine emperor Alexios III Angelos and install him in his place. The Crusaders agreed and sailed to Constantinople in April of 1203. By spring of 1204, Constantinople fell to the Crusaders after a year-long siege. They installed Alexios IV as emperor, but the local Byzantines ousted Alexios soon after. The Crusaders, angry that they would not be reimbursed for their troubles, then besieged and sacked Constantinople yet again. The Byzantine Empire was then divided between the Venetians and the Crusaders. Some of the Crusaders did follow on and tried to continue with the original plan of invading the Holy Land, but by this point the crusade had mostly fizzled out, as only a fraction of the original crusading force remained. In 1216, Pope Honorius III called for a new crusade. Taking up the cross this time were Andrew II, King of Hungary, and Leopold VI, Duke of Austria. The Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick II, had also pledged to crusade, but ultimately did not fulfill this pledge due to political problems in Germany. The Crusaders left in 1217 and landed in Syria in 1218. After several months of fighting with little gain, Andrew considered his vow fulfilled and returned to Hungary. The rest of the Crusaders carried on with the plan of invading Egypt. In June 1218, they besieged the port city of Damietta. During the siege, a group of Italian reinforcements arrived under the command of Cardinal Pelagio Galvani, who, along with John, King of Acre, took control of the Crusades' leadership. By February of 1219, the Crusaders had surrounded Damietta, and the ruler of the Ayyubids, Al-Kamil, began negotiations with them. He offered to give the Crusaders the city of Jerusalem in exchange for them leaving Egypt. John readily agreed, but Pelagio refused unless several fortresses near Jerusalem were also ceded to the Crusaders. Al-Kamil refused, and the crusade continued. While the Crusaders successfully captured the city of Damietta by November 1219, they were defeated by the Ayyubids at the Battle of Mansoura in August 1221. In exchange for safe passage back to Europe, the Crusaders were forced to give up all the territory they had gained. In 1227, Pope Gregory IX called on Frederick II to fulfill his vow to crusade. He did just that and launched his own crusade in August 1227 and arrived in Acre in September 1228. This was perhaps the best date Frederick could have picked, as the ruler of the Ayyubid dynasty, Al-Kamil, was currently embroiled in a civil war against his brother. Al-Kamil could not wage two wars at the same time, so he made a similar offer to Frederick that he had made to the leaders of the Fifth Crusade, ceding Jerusalem to the Crusader states in exchange for peace. Frederick accepted, and this agreement was formalized in the Treaty of Jaffa. Jerusalem had been returned to Christian hands after 42 years of Muslim control, along with a 10-year peace deal. Despite this massive success, most Christians were upset at the fact that Frederick had secured a peace deal with the Muslims, and that he had left Jerusalem vulnerable to a Muslim counterattack after the peace deal would expire. Dissatisfied with the results of the Sixth Crusade, Pope Gregory IX called for a new crusade in 1234. Frederick II opposed this, as the 10-year truce would not expire until 1239. In response, the Pope excommunicated him. Taking up the cross this time was King Theobald I of Navarre, along with several other barons from across Europe. The Crusaders landed at Acre in September 1239. Initially, the Crusaders suffered numerous defeats, even losing Jerusalem in December. However, the Ayyubid dynasty was plunged into another civil war, and Theobald took advantage of this to secure extra land for the Crusader states via treaty. Ultimately, the Barons' Crusade secured the most land for the Crusader states since the First Crusade. The gains made by the Barons' Crusade were reversed in 1244 when Jerusalem was recaptured by the Ayyubids. This loss prompted King Louis IX of France to launch another crusade. His army left in August of 1248 and landed at Damietta in 1249, capturing the city within a few months. Following this, the Crusaders advanced down the Nile and fought the Ayyubids at the Second Battle of Mansoura. The Crusaders won, but lost a large number of their troops in the process. The Crusader army was then defeated at the Battle of Faraskour, and Louis was captured. He was later ransomed for a large sum of money, and all the Crusaders returned back to Europe. In 1270, Louis IX launched another crusade, this time to North Africa. Edward, Duke of Gascony, had originally planned to lead a group of reinforcements to Louis's crusade. However, Louis died shortly after landing in North Africa, and so Edward diverted his army to Acre. Edward's army was incredibly small, and so could deal little damage to the mighty Mamluk Empire. However, Edward was able to prevent several coastal cities from falling into Mamluk hands, and he was able to sign another 10-year peace deal with the Mamluks. While this crusade can be considered a minor success, it ultimately did little to stop the decline of the Crusader states. Acre fell to the Mamluks in 1291, marking the end of permanent Christian presence in the Levant. Thank you for watching this video. You can help this channel out by subscribing or liking the video, and as always, credit to these people for some of the images shown here.